We have been working together in this capacity for a very long time now, which is really great because we've really figured out a lot as we've done this, and it's an honor to be here with you all today. I am, as David mentioned, the study abroad and off-campus study coordinator at University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and so I am the liaison in the financial aid office for off-campus study issues that relate to students studying elsewhere. Let me just shrink this down a little bit. All right, here we go. So there we go. Here is my contact information. I'll have this at the end, and I know David has this as well. I always welcome questions, so feel free to reach out at a later date as well. And email is easier than phone right now with the remote business. Here's a little bit about our agenda for the discussion today. We're just going to talk a little bit about how financial aid works, a little bit of the details. I know there's a lot of familiarity between the NSE plans, the home or host, so we'll discuss that. How financial aid works from our office for our incoming students who are on National Student Exchange. And I also like to throw in a couple of financial aid examples because financial aid can be quite complicated. And I think it's really helpful to see things that our students are really seeing, because it's really their perspective of what happens with their financial aid that they're interested in. Obviously, all the nuances are what we are also interested in, but just to give some examples of why things might be relevant and just some best practices for our partners and for outgoing advising. And we have been a financial aid exception school for a few years now, but I did work in the capacity of this role before we were, so I've got experience from both of them. And again, this is our perspective. So a little bit about financial aid and how it works. Students apply, of course, for financial aid mainly with a FAFSA or another application. Some schools require additional information, like different application types. And schools determine what their packaging philosophies are with federal requirements, as well as institutional funds and how those are spent. So a lot of things are considered the same because it's the federal requirements, but then the schools also have their own way that they spend, donor funds and things like that on campus. One of the main things that we'll talk about today is how cost of attendance works. And that's really important because, again, that gets back to our student view. And we are looking at what they are looking at, as a student going on exchange, like really what's the bottom line of this and how will this work for me? The disbursement of funds is important because schools have certain requirements about how that's done, and it's not always done when people would specifically want them to. And so we'll touch on that. And then also how funding works for travel and living expenses, which is tied to disbursements, and just some of those details. Obviously, we've got the NSE plans home or host payment. And I'm transitioning, as it sounds like a lot of you are as well, from the Plan A, Plan B thing. But this just talks a little bit about how aid is done. I won't focus on this because you'll all have access to this slide. And I know at some level you're familiar with it. But basically, where is our aid coming from? So, when students do file their FAFSA, and I know this is a wordy slide, but there's a lot of information that I wanted to get on here. At our campus, when we've got incoming students filing, they'll file the FAFSA. They could have to submit documents for federal verification. So it's really important that they list your school code early so that your campus has enough time to actually work with the record and get everything ready and get everything set before the start of the term. Students who are on incoming host payment, formerly Plan A, are only eligible for federal aid through the schools. And so in that case, they are forfeiting some of the funds potentially that they have at your school if they are incoming Plan A. And again, I'll give an example of that. One thing that we do at our campus, and David does a lot of the specifics behind the records and how they're coded, but we do require academic transcripts when students come in because federal loans do have a requirement that you've completed a certain number of credits per grade level. And so if we have all of our students, for example, listed as a freshman, they're only allotted $5,500 through a federal loan. And as a junior or senior, they're allotted up to $7,500 for their amount as a federal loan. So it's something that we do. Not all campuses do, but I do just want to mention that because that's another nuance of why it's important to get information in early to make sure your students have the FAFSA school code updated so that the aid office has time to get everything completed. Here is an example of a financial aid package for a student. If I were coming in and working with somebody, this is what we would be looking at. We would compare their, and actually, let me just mention that one of the things that David and I do, we have a direct referral service, and he gives students my name and email, and we set up a Zoom meeting, and we actually walk through all of this information, their cost of attendance, their financial aid package, and how that works, so that they don't have any surprises. Ideally, they're doing this before they've committed to the National Student Exchange Program, but it's something that we can do at any point in the process. And what works really well with our advising procedure that we have like this is that our students are familiar with everything long before they even leave for their exchange. And if they've got questions, they know that I'm the go-to for those. So that's really helped with our students for their planning purposes. So I do want to mention that. This is, of course, what we would look at in one of these meetings is we would look at their school's cost of attendance and then look at what your financial aid package here. So in this case, just knowing what I know about this student, this would be a student who's a non-resident here at Minnesota. And this would be an example of some of their aid for the semester that they're going on exchange. Now, we are, of course, a financial aid exception campus. So all of our students, regardless of what plan they are, receive aid from our campus. So that makes our advising a little bit easier in the sense that this would remain their same financial aid. We are giving them their financial aid package if they are on host payment, for example. It's a kind of a no-brainer because what we've got is what you have here is what you have there. Quite similar to students who are doing study abroad programs. That's another example of how it is with that financial aid exception. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. In this case, working with the student, it's a green light. We would just talk about what the tuition payment would be based on the host payments example, if it's host payment, as well as living expenses, whether home or host payment. Here is another example. In this case, this would be a Minnesota resident who has, in addition to those federal funds, they also have our Minnesota State Grant and an admissions scholarship from our office. So they have quite a bit more gift aid, as you can see. Now, again, being an exception campus, for our school, our students would receive all of that same financial aid package while going abroad. But I wanted to mention what this would look like from the perspective of a student who is going away on a host payment without that exception campus. In that case, again, the state and institutional funds do not travel. So the student would be eligible for Pell Grant, SEOG grant, and those loans at that school, but they would, of course, be forfeiting that state grant and admission scholarship. And so this is, again, a reason why it's really helpful for students to know in advance what type of funding that they would be looking at, because obviously that's a lot of money. I'd be happy if you said, here, would you like this money? So that, that is just an example of that. One of the things that I find really helpful from the financial aid office perspective is that profile page to have the accurate costs for planning purposes. When I'm working with a student for our advising, again, I'm always, digging in there, showing them that page. Of course, they're familiar with it because they can't wait to go on exchange and they know all about that NSE page. But what I do is I also pull them into the official cost of attendance page for the school, just so that we can see all of that information. Because again, as that financial aid office perspective, that's what the lens that I'm looking at this with. Another thing that's really important is at our campus, our Minnesota State Grant Fund is one that is based on 15 or more credits for the full award amount. And so while a normal full-time enrollment might be 12 credits, this one type of financial aid does require a specific number of credits per semester. And so it's really important when students have this, well, David keeps us informed of the enrollment no matter what changes they are. But in our case, if a student who has this fund is dropping from 15 credits down to 13, while they're still a full-time student, that does impact one of their financial aid types. So it's really important that you as exchange folks let your financial aid office know what is, what's going on with enrollment, whether it's at the start of the term, any of that fine tuning that they're doing, or if a student is withdrawing at all through the course of the exchange. Just because we have really strict timelines of when we have to do our reviews, and the quicker the better, and obviously we need the most accurate information. So our relationship works so great because, of course, if David's got questions about financial aid, he reaches out to me right away and we can get everything resolved. It's also really important that when students come back from their exchange, that they get their transcript posted right away. And that allows for everything to be done in a timely manner. And in some cases, that does also reflect grade level changes that I'd mentioned in the beginning. If your student was a sophomore while they were on exchange and now they're looking upon returning to campus to be a junior in terms of their credits, that does impact their financial aid. So it's important as well from that perspective. And also, as I'm sure you've all learned, anytime there's difficulty or challenges getting a transcript in, time does not make that process any easier. And so it's just important to get that resolved shortly. In the case of a student who might have a financial aid hold, there are some private loans, for example, that a student could use to pay their bill to allow release of a transcript. But again, if too much time passes, those are not options that are available down the road. So the sooner the better in getting that information done. Another thing that's really important with our process and that I work with our students on is the billing process. So we are a school that starts a little bit later in the semester. We start typically the Tuesday after Labor Day, and we don't disperse financial aid early, as most campuses don't. Logistically, it would be impossible to designate an early disbursement for students for different schools, and it does not work. So we simply don't do it. And that works fine because we can let students know, here's when your financial aid will disperse. But if you start classes in the middle of August, you'd want to make sure to reach out to the bursar's office at your host school. And when I say you, I mean our student, to make sure that they can have a deferred billing or a later due date for their financial aid because funds are pending. Again, this is one of the things that works great for us. I know that some schools have an automatic deferred billing for students who are on exchange, and that's really helpful because it's just one less thing for the student to be doing and trying to resolve. But again, since we don't disperse aid early, it can make things problematic for places that require aid up front, aid before it's dispersed at their home school. All right, so here's some other good best practices for students who are outgoing. That preview meeting, as I mentioned, that's something that David and I, we've just got that down so perfectly. It just works really well for students, and Zoom, quite frankly, has worked great for them. They can take a meeting anywhere. They don't have to come to campus. And it just allows us to share our screen just as we're doing now, make sure they understand everything, understand what's required and anything that's up front, and gives them the ability to get all of this figured out. So when they are arriving on campus for their exchange, they aren't thinking about, gosh, how does my bill work? Or when will my aid be dispersed or something like that. So I do recommend that there be somebody in your financial aid office who is familiar with the National Student Exchange Program and how it works, so that they're able to just help navigate those questions a little bit more for your students. Also, it's really important that they understand the billing process, how that works. If they need proof of funding for deferred billing, I'm happy to make note of that and send an email to the bursar's office at a school where that's required. Now, one thing that we don't have as an issue anymore is host payment plan A students. In that case, the typical host payment plan A, those students are, of course, receiving aid at their host school, and they are required to complete loan exit counseling at their home school because they're not receiving aid there for the term. Obviously, their plan is to come back, but that is something that is a federal requirement, and it's not something that can be waived. Since that's not an issue for us anymore, we haven't had that issue with our students, but for when we did have that issue, what I would encourage students to do is use that as a really, strong opportunity to just check in with their loan debt and make sure that they are, comfortable with everything moving forward and that they understand. I think for all of us, it's helpful to have more of an eye on what our finances look like. So we try to spin it like that, but again, it is a requirement. And then also one other thing is if a student has an outside scholarship, maybe from their hometown or their small school or something, that's literally where the donor is writing a check and mailing it to the campus. We just actually had this issue the other day. It's best for the donor to send it directly to the financial aid office with a check made payable to the school. In some cases, they would issue a check to the University of Minnesota and David Holliday. And David, as our student, has to come in and endorse the check as a student because it is made payable to him. Now, if we're on campus and he needs to do that, that's fine. He can just drop by our one-stop office and do that. But if it's at if you're away, whether it's studying abroad or on national student exchange, that makes things a little bit more complicated. So we always ask donors to make the check payable just to University of Minnesota and reference the student in the memo section. And also, of course, the funds would go to the school that is issuing the aid to the student. So in the case of our students, they all come to us, but if our students were host payment, that check would go to the host payment school. All right, that's a lot of information from me, and I've talked quickly. What sort of questions and things would be helpful to discuss?
Yeah, Kathy, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
I'll pitch to you. So one question from Allison, their financial aid office is not able to issue Pell Grants for students doing NSE if they're taking credits beyond the 120 credit required in order to graduate. Mm-hmm. Does that question make sense to you? Is that a federal standard? Is that an institutional decision?
It does. What comes to mind is satisfactory academic progress, a SAP appeal. Mm-hmm. So, there's a certain number of credits that a student can take for their studies. So if typically you think of 120 credits because that would be what's required for a degree. I don't want to step on any toes or anything like that, but students are able to receive funding for longer than that. I see the LEU just came up in the chat, and that's something that comes into play as well. Students, and again, I'll just use our campus as an example. For 120 credits as the typical degree, you would receive a warning at 150 credits stating that you're approaching the end. And this would be for financial aid, period, not just Pell Grants, that you're approaching the end. And then at 180 credits, a student would be cut off due to satisfactory academic progress, or SAP, because we do love our acronyms here in higher ed. And students are able to do an appeal for that, a professional judgment appeal through the financial aid office. It just depends again on the philosophies of each school, how they do that. But yes, it's quite possible with that LEU that popped up, that could be an issue, and that would be Pell specific.
There's a few more questions, but relating to that, Kathy, this just came up this week on our campus. Students, so our campus accepts 98% of NSE credits as transfer credit coming back. There are a few types of credits that will not transfer to our campus. And those are, can be defined and identified before a student goes on exchange. But what are the risks? Is that a federal policy as well, that if a credit does not transfer back to the home institution, if that's where financial aid was awarded, that the financial aid could be recalled at that point? Can you explain how that works?
Yes, it would be. And as you mentioned, yes, we did have that question. So of course, when a student goes on exchange, we are using placeholder credits. I don't know if that's a term that's common for other schools as well, but kind of a dummy registration to represent what they're taking while they're on exchange. And if you were a student and we're telling us that you're taking 15 credits, and so we're basing your financial aid on 15 credits, but the reality is our admissions office will not accept half of those credits. So let's say they'll only accept 8. We wouldn't knowingly give a student 15 credits worth of aid when they only have 8. So in that case, they would be billed for the difference in the financial aid that they received. So it is very important that students that take courses that are applicable. And I know one of the cases that we were talking about, it was one specific course. And so if the student were still full-time for the other credits, and like maybe 12 is full-time, and then they would have 16 with the one course that wouldn't transfer in, we would just view them as enrolled for 12 credits, because then when they come back in, they can take that class and exclude that from their grade requirements. So they can certainly do that, but they wouldn't receive aid for it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. I'm gonna, there's a lot of great questions still coming in. So I just want to clarify. So students placed on home payments, also known as Plan B, receive financial aid from their home institution. That is NSE policy. Typically, students that are placed on host payment, those are students that are paying resident rate tuition to their host institution while on exchange and not paying their home school. Most campuses, that means the students apply for financial aid through that host institution to revise their FAFSA and apply for financial aid there, only qualifying for federal aid. There's a question here about becoming an exception school, and I think Jeff answered it. So an exception school, this is an institutional decision. NSE doesn't dictate this. It's just a matter of, we want to know how your campus is operating with regard to financial aid. So becoming an exception school means your campus, as the student's home institution, will always disperse financial aid to your outbound students, regardless of their payment plan. And the reason that we made this switch a couple of years ago is NSE actually, I'm not housed in study abroad on our campus, but I decided to follow what study abroad does. As Kathy said earlier, study abroad or learning abroad center always issued financial aid from the home campus, even if a student was going on a third-party provider program or paying elsewhere. So I wanted NSE to emulate that essentially. So we became a financial aid exception school. It's an institutional decision. So Kathy helped me make the argument and make sure things were in place. That means our students maintain their full financial aid package, federal aid, state aid, and institutional aid as well. So it was a really important change for us, especially to benefit our students. And we have a high percentage of Pell eligible students and otherwise high financial needs students that do NSE. And so in order to better support them financially, we became this financial aid exception campus. And there are some added benefits, as Kathy said. We no longer have students do the exit loan counseling. It's much smoother on our campus as well. There's been a few stumbling blocks, but it's really been a good choice for our campus and our students. Somebody asked about the placeholder course, and Kathy just mentioned this. Yes, our campus, and we recommend most campuses have a placeholder course that you place your student in while they're away on exchange. That maintains their status as a student. It also triggers tuition if they're a home pay student, or it should block tuition if they're a host pay student. And then that placeholder course is also what will allow for the disbursement of funds, or that's how our campus operates. So our placeholder course is a variable credit course. And I bug the students repeatedly, usually a month before their exchanges to begin. I ask them, how many credits are you registered for? And then I bug them the week before their semester, the week their exchange begins, in order to try to see if their enrollment is changing. Because my placeholder course has to be set based on the actual number of credits they're taking on exchange. So we have the full-time threshold at 12 credits, which all of you have, or all of us have for federal aid. But then as Kathy mentioned, we have our state grant, as well as I think there's some scholarships that require students to be at 15 credits. So it's really important for me to know if a student is at 12 credits versus 15 or anywhere in between. And so I set that placeholder course and I make changes to it if the enrollment changes. Then, of course, NSE coordinators know this. NSE has the enrollment verification process in place where every coordinator that is hosting students on Exchange has to verify that student's enrollment at the census date on that campus. So at the end of the add drop period, typically about 3 weeks into the semester, every NSE coordinator has to verify the enrollment of the students that they're hosting. And again, specifically indicating the number of credits the student is taking for those of us that have those placeholder courses. And so that's a process that's in place that should facilitate that enrollment verification. The most immediate question I have here is about the cost of attendance. So I'm going to share my screen real quick just to share the information on the NSE website with regard to cost of attendance. But Kathy, can you explain how cost of attendance works?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I will. I do also want to mention, I was scrolling through the chats while you were talking, David, and somebody also posted that if a student's degree requirements are met, that could also be a reason that they would be cut off of funding. So yes, that would be something as well. And again, we're in our situation, we're working with our students with that advising. It feels like most of our students are maybe juniors when they go abroad, so we haven't had a lot of that issue. I'm sorry, when they go on exchange. So we haven't had a lot of that issue, but yes, if a student's degree requirements are met, they would not be eligible for financial aid as well. So I did just want to make sure to circle back to that. But yes, so cost of attendance. When I'm working with our students, again, we're pulling up this, this page because it's so great for them to have all of this information on the portal. And with that campus budget link, what I actually do is I go into, and here's ours. I go into what the school's designated cost of attendance is for our planning purposes. And so the adjustments that I would make for a student on exchange, let's say they're on host payment from our campus, is I would look at their tuition and fee figure from, again, I just go right to the admissions or the official page for the cost of attendance to walk through everything, but their tuition and fees, room and board, et cetera, and basically just use their costs. We are able to factor in the cost of their expense to get there, for example, their flight. In that case, students are required to send me a copy of their ticket or their plane ticket or their plan. We don't typically have students who are looking to get funding though for those expenses. In the case of a student who is doing a home pay on our campus, so they're paying U of M tuition and fees and the living expenses at their host fees, I would use our budget component for tuition and fees for the term, and then the housing expenses from the cost of attendance from the host school. And I make, where PeopleSoft campus, I make those manual adjustments in the student's record, their financial aid information, and actually use that and adjust their cost of attendance and aid package at our school. So it's very hands-on. Oh yes, thank you, David. So yes, this is what I would do is pull up this information, because then what I'm certain of is that we have the most accurate information when a student is applying for admissions at that campus in the very beginning of their college career. That would be what they're looking at. So it's the same thing. It sounds like it's a lot of work. It's really not. I mean, it's very fast. As we're doing all this, and again, we're able to have our budgets accurately reflected, and then I just do like a little screen snip for audit purposes so that I can put that in the student's file with where I'm pulling these numbers from. And another perk too about being an exception campus is that when we were not, our students who were on host pay, they just were sort of off of our radar for that time because they were receiving aid at their host school. But now we're able to just keep track of things a little bit easier because, again, the students remain on our aid platform the whole time. I hope that answers.
Amy had a great question here. If you are hosting a student on exchange on host pay, NSE policy states that you must be able to award that student financial aid, which is tricky. Amy points out we don't award students who are transient or non-degree seeking. And so what I do with my admissions office is treat those incoming students, host pay students, as degree seeking through the admissions process as well as through the coding process, essentially. So we do collect, they do actually fill out our transfer student admissions application. We do collect official transcripts from all of their prior colleges. We also, my campus requires a high school transcript, which sometimes is difficult for students to get. But so we do treat those students as degree seeking in order to code them, to be in compliance, but also to code them in our systems as degree seeking. And so they are degree seeking for that one semester or maybe two, and we're able to award aid. Is that helpful, Amy, to answer your question? Perfect, thank you. Gemma from University of Wisconsin Green Bay asks, can you please explain the process you went through to become an exception campus, which offices approved, timeline, etc. So Kathy and I think, I don't remember if I brought it up or if you brought it up. I probably did because I was aware of the option at least. Yes. With Kathy. And so, together we kind of made the case, built the case for why we wanted to become an exception campus. Kathy, my understanding is you had to go up through your superiors in the Office of Student Finance, probably the Director of Financial Aid had to make the final approval. Is that correct?
Correct. So what I would have done is given an example, and one of my favorite examples again is that one of our Minnesota resident who at our campus, if you come in as a new high school student, and I'm just going to make this kind of quick, and you're Pell eligible, between Pell Grant, Minnesota State Grant, and what we call U-Promise funding, students basically have the tuition and fees component paid for. I mean, it's a really great process that we have for our grant programs. But again, that requires U-Promise, which is additional funding, and Minnesota State Grant, which does not travel out on host pay programs. So what I did was give examples like I did with our student who would have lost $4,000 and basically said, study abroad is doing this. It would be funded the same way where our study abroad programs are receiving their full aid package. This would absolutely be beneficial to our students. And of course, that's what we're here for. That's our bottom line, is to make this work well for our students, and obviously within the compliance factor. That's our favorite word there, but to have this work. And so I explained that to our director so that when questions came about, they were familiar with what what is this host payment plan, home payment. I mean, it took me a little bit of time to get that figured out, and I still trip this up and I do it every day. So, it was really helpful to explain that to them. And then David talked with folks on his end, and I feel like it was approved really quickly. And it just makes it a lot easier for us. And, again, our students aren't missing out on funding that they had to forfeit in the past.
Yeah, I agree. And it really has helped. We've always had a high percentage of, high financial need students that have done NSE, but, when our TRIO program or when our other, student support offices and advisors that work with high financial need students, when they really understand how NSE works, it's affordable tuition wise, either paying U of M tuition or paying in-state tuition elsewhere. And the fact that they're able to maintain their full financial aid package, it's really helped in recruitment of students because they realize it's truly going to be affordable for them. And the process is familiar. They know how to apply for financial aid from the U of M. They know how disbursement works. and it simplifies things for those students. I think we've covered everything in the chat. If there are questions, please resurface them. Jamie asked, is an exception campus decision designation shown somewhere on the NSE site so that other campuses know that? If yes, where? So yes, financial aid exception campuses. Well, there are two. Let's see. This, for some reason, is not hyperlinked like it used to be. So the other place that this is, not sure why this isn't hyperlinked. It used to be. But the two things regarding that. First of all, there is a list on the backside of the NSE website in campus info. This is, coordinators have access to this. So if you're a financial aid person, you wouldn't necessarily have access to this, but coordinators, this is where the list of financial aid exception campuses is housed. So you can see right now the number. I think we're up to 25 or so. So this is available, but again, this is password protected just for NSE coordinators. Normally that hyperlink on the front end, I'm not sure why it's not working, would also bring you here. But the NSE website is built to be somewhat smart. If you visited the NSE website, you know that there's a campus login. Students especially are prompted to select their current campus. When they visit the NSE website, NSE coordinators should know to do that as well. So I want to show you how smart our website is. So right now I'm logged in as a U of M Twin Cities person. And so now when I look at a campus profile, let's look at UMass Amherst, the financial aid tab here. This is information for students, of course. So this says the same thing. For eligible host payment students, aid is awarded by and dispersed from your home campus. That's because I'm logged in as University of Minnesota and I'm an exception campus. So the NSE website is giving students and coordinators accurate information. Now, if I go back out here and log in as somebody else, so let's log in as let's log in as Alabama State. I don't think they're an exception campus. And now if I go back and look at UMass Amherst and clicked on financial aid, now students are presented with the correct instructions that if you're placed on host payment at this school, aid is awarded by and dispersed from your host campus. You see the aid programs that are available through that school, the host school, and you see that school's FAFSA code. So this is also the other indicator, the instructions, students, coordinators, as well as financial aid folks should always do that campus login, because then you're going to be given the most accurate information.
That's really interesting to see that.
That was my idea.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. So a couple of things that I know we maybe quickly, well, I did show this, I guess, on the tuition and fees tab. This is the campus budget. And so coordinators, in the next couple of weeks, you're going to be reminded to update your submission forms for this upcoming academic year. And those are the forms that when you log in, there's 8 or 9 different forms that you fill out. It's very critical that you spend time in updating those forms, especially the budget form, because obviously our tuition changes from year to year. There may be new fees, room and board rates, things like that will change, because that's the information that's presented on this this particular campus budget on the NSE website. Now, Kathy's preference is always to go to that campus's website, their actual cost of attendance on their admissions office page or the financial aid page, because then you know that it's accurate, up-to-date information. Because honestly, I do come across information on the NSE website, the campus budgets here, that is out of date because a coordinator has not updated their information. So that's probably our best practice is to actually go to that campus's website to calculate the cost of attendance.
And David, if I could just hop in here too, there's a question from Jeffrey Simpson that I'm just looking through the chat again about adjusting cost of attendance. I make the adjustments whether the cost is higher or lower than our cost of attendance, and adjust financial aid accordingly. In a situation where a student is a high need student, that might not have any impacts with the aid that they receive. Maybe they hadn't taken out their loans and don't plan to. In another case, it might impact subsidized and unsubsidized eligibility. So I do actually take the full figure, the accurate figures for that term and adjust it. And in some cases, if a student if the costs are less than being at our school, then we would actually reduce it. And in addition to that, when we're canceling out on a loan that they are no longer eligible for, we're able to explain why that is. Here are your costs. You have all of your expenses met for school. So, because of that, here are those costs. And of course, that's great for them because their costs are less and their loan debt in that case would go down. So we're adjusting it no matter whether it's up or down. And then if they want aid, filling in that gap. I hope that answers that question. I'm curious, what some of the challenges are, if other folks have something that they would share or questions that haven't been addressed, what are some of those things that you've always thought, gosh, how does this work? Or, this is always kind of a hiccup for us. Because it's nice to have people together to be able to talk about it.
And I'd also like to, make the recommendation to NSE coordinators. If you don't know your financial aid person or have a solid relationship with your financial aid office, work at that, because there are lots of complicating details with financial aid. I will say I'm not a financial aid expert at all, and so any financial aid question that comes in, I refer them to Kathy immediately, or CC Kathy on an email. And so build that relationship. It's really going to make the process smoother for you, but especially for your students, and probably also for your financial aid office. So build up that relationship if you haven't done so already.
Yes, I agree that has made things a lot easier. And in my office, in the financial aid office, I'm not the person that works with our return of Title IV funds when a student withdraws, for example, or has, is processing those transcripts and working with those credit changes. But, David has gotten to know, her name is Christina, and just having that relationship just makes it so much easier when you're able to just say, hey, what's the situation here? Or we've got a question, or what's going on. And we just have it as a standard process. If somebody's wanting to drop a class, hey, they reach out to David, I'm thinking about dropping a class. He just loops me right into the equation, and we see what the impacts are. Because in addition to the short-term thought of, would they have to pay back any financial aid? Obviously, we want to keep that satisfactory academic progress in mind, for having them complete the credits that they start and make sure that they're on track for graduation and in alignment with SAP.
Somebody messaged me directly. How do students cycle through your offices? Meaning, where do they start? Which office is next, etc. So most of the time, I think students start with me or with my office. We host info sessions. I do one-on-one advising meetings. I have a student assistant that does the same thing. And so that gives our students basic information about how the program works. But in those meetings and in the info session, I give students Kathy's name and email address, that if you receive financial aid, reach out to Kathy to make sure you understand how it's going to work. And so a lot of times I think students contact Kathy, and Kathy meets with them, shares with them the information about how their financial aid will be packaged if they do NSE, talks through cost of attendance, things like that. And, I think that's the ideal process, so that if a student finds out from Kathy that you're going to have this amount of a gap between your cost of attendance and financial aid awarding. They know either I need to make some money to do that, or maybe NSE is not for me. And so I think that's the ideal process. There are certainly students who apply for NSE without having talked to Kathy. And so in my orientation with students after they're placed, and actually Kathy usually attends my orientation either in person or virtually, to talk to students, put a name to the face and talk to students about how financial aid will work. And so many students will follow up with Kathy after they've actually been placed. And hopefully they don't get bad news and find out, though, NSE is not going to work because it's not going to work financially, which I think sometimes may happen, but at least they know who to go to with questions or if problems arise. So I think the ideal process is for students to learn about NSE, be referred to the financial aid office, or understand how their financial aid is going to be packaged, and then actually proceed. The other thing that I wanted to mention quickly, the really nice thing, so Kathy's job, and she has a team as well, works with all of the students that are studying away, whether it's abroad or domestically through NSE. And so I know, Kathy, that sometimes you and your team have been able to refer students to NSE. Maybe they originally wanted to study abroad. And we all know there are affordable study abroad programs, and I'm a huge proponent of studying abroad. I studied abroad in college, but in reality, it can be more expensive, sometimes significantly more. And so I know Kathy and her team, if they meet with a student who has their heart set on studying abroad, finds out it's not going to work financially, or there's going to be a huge gap they have to cover, Kathy and her team will actually refer them to NSE and say, have you checked this out? This is maybe more affordable and a great study away option as well. So use your financial aid team to serve as a referral to NSE as well.
Yes, I'm glad that you mentioned that, David, because we had a student interested in taking language in France, study abroad courses, and it just financially was not a good fit for them. And again, we do the same preview meeting process for those students, but it can be a lot more difficult when the programs are more expensive. And in this case, I said, hey, let's talk a little bit about National Student Exchange. In this case, it was a referral that I had for you. Usually your referrals are coming to me. And I believe that the student was able to find a course to make it all work and meet with some of their program goals, and the costs were just so much more aligned with what they were thinking of. And with the process of us meeting with students, it really eliminates some of those I'm no longer eligible for aid questions because my degree requirements are met. I think our academic advisors as well are doing a really great job of promoting these off-campus experiences earlier in a student's academic career. You're reaching out to them maybe as their freshmen to be thinking about this so that they are able to do this. And at the time that we're meeting with them, we're not up against those credit limits, or I'm a fifth year student and facing those challenges. And it's just a lot easier to administer all of it because they're in track with their graduation and they're able to use these classes for their degree requirements.
I'm just putting my email address and Kathy's email address as well in the chat. NSE coordinators, you know how to reach me, of course. But as Kathy said, if any of you have questions, or if your campus has questions about financial aid processes, Kathy's my go-to expert, of course, and is gracious enough to be helpful to many of our campus partners through NSE. So please do reach out if anybody has questions for me or for Kathy. The one other thing, I think Kathy touched on this, is the importance of the transcript. So at the end of every, and actually my campus requires it at the end of every semester of their exchange, we require an official transcript to come back to our campus. It's the student's responsibility to request that, although I know there are a couple of campuses that will issue the transcript on the student's behalf. So it's very important, again, to remind your students to have that transcript sent back to their home institution, of course, to facilitate the credits transferring or being applied to their record, but also for that financial aid, compliance of making sure they completed the number of credits that they were awarded for. And issues sometimes come up with that. Students don't request their transcript because they don't know how, or they have a hold on their account at their host institution. And that is fine. If you're hosting a student on NSE and they have an unpaid bill at the end of their exchange, you should put a hold on their record. That could affect them, financial aid wise down the road. But they're responsible, of course, for paying their bills. And so the importance of making sure your students know to request transcripts and how to request transcripts at the end of their exchange, or for at least some of us, and probably it's best practice to have a transcript sent after every semester. So if a student's on exchange for a full year, you should get one after the fall and then another one after the spring. We're almost out of time here. Any other questions, comments? Well, I think we can wrap it up here. Thanks so much for joining us today. NSE coordinators, we're going to do a better job, I think, of having sessions like this. And this was part of the conference as well, the virtual conference, where we're able to engage your campus partners in NSE processes and discussions to hopefully solidify the processes, solidify the strength of your program on your campus. So keep it up. Keep inviting your campus partners. Campus partners, thanks so much for being here. Reach out to your NSE coordinator on your campus or to me or anyone else at NSE headquarters if there's anything that we can do for you. I really appreciate the time and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
Kathy, appreciate you being here.
Oh, it's